Is that Rebecca Sullivan, the one who saved 3 people in a single day last summer? That's what the new Beach Patrol volunteers whispered when I walked past them at 5:47 a.m., 43 minutes before my shift officially started. My name is Rebecca Anne Sullivan. I'm 28 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was just another lifeguard with good instincts and a work ethic that bordered on obsessive. But just another lifeguard doesn't check wind patterns, tide charts, and water temperature before most people have had their first cup of coffee. Just another lifeguard doesn't know the exact position of every swimmer, every child with floaties, every teenager showing off for friends within a 200-yard radius. I do. You want to know what hypervigilance looks like? It looks like standing on a 15-foot tower with the Pacific Ocean spread out like a living threat beneath you, counting heads every 30 seconds. It looks like knowing that the elderly man with the sun hat always enters the water at 9:15 a.m. and stays for exactly 23 minutes. It looks like watching a mother apply sunscreen to her toddler and thinking, she's distracted, kid could bolt for the water in under 10 seconds. The morning briefing felt like muscle memory. Captain Robert William Foster, former Navy, built like a brick wall with salt and pepper hair that never moved in the ocean breeze, stood at the front of our small team. 6 lifeguards, 2 trainees, 1 mission. Keep everyone breathing. Surf's running 3 to 4 feet today, Captain Foster announced, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn quiet. Riptide warning is yellow. Tourists don't read signs, so keep your eyes sharp. His gaze found mine, and I caught that look, the one that said he still wondered sometimes if hiring me had been the right call. 3 years ago, I'd walked into his office with a resume that made him raise an eyebrow and a recommendation letter that made him sit back in his chair. Certified in swiftwater rescue, wilderness first aid, advanced CPR, and psychological first aid. College swimming records that put me in the top 10 in the state. But also a note from my previous supervisor. Outstanding technical skills. Some concerns about anxiety management under stress. That should have been a red flag. In this job, anxiety can kill people. But Captain Foster looked at my test scores, watched me swim, and saw something else. He saw someone who understood that water wasn't just water. It was a living thing that could turn deadly in the space of a heartbeat. "Sullivan," he called out as the briefing ended, "you're taking Hayes through advanced rescue drills today." David Christopher Hayes, 17 years old, eager as a golden retriever, and carrying the kind of family baggage that reminded me, uncomfortably, of myself. He bounced over, wetsuit hanging loose around his shoulders, eyes bright with the kind of hope that hadn't been beaten out of him yet. "Morning, Rebecca," he said, and I caught the slight tremor in his voice. 3 weeks on the job, and he still called me by my first name like he was testing whether I'd correct him. I didn't. Hierarchy mattered, but respect mattered more. "Morning, Hayes. Ready to learn why most people shouldn't be allowed near water without supervision?" His grin was infectious. "Always." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We started with basic positioning. I stood behind him on the platform, hands guiding his shoulders to the correct angle. "What do you see?" I asked. Water? People swimming?" "Wrong." My voice was sharp, but not unkind. "You see a woman in Sector 3 swimming parallel to shore. She's fighting a current and doesn't know it yet. You see a teenage boy in Sector 5 who's been underwater for 8 seconds longer than his friends, probably stuck underwater or showing off for friends, within a 200-yard radius. You see a family setting up directly in front of the no swimming sign, which means they can't read, don't care, or don't speak English. All 3 are problems." David's head swiveled, tracking each point I made. "How do you see all that at once?" "Practice, and the understanding that water doesn't care about your vacation plans." We ran scenarios for the next hour, David throwing the buoy, me timing his response. David identifying potential drowning victims, while I played devil's advocate. "She's just playing, right? Kids splash around all the time." "No," David said, getting more confident. "She's vertical in the water, arms slapping the surface, mouth barely above the waterline. Classic passive drowning." "Good. Time." 15 seconds from identification to water entry. "Better." Standard is 10. Again. At 9:47 a.m., we got our first real test. A middle-aged man in board shorts and the kind of sunburn that screamed vacation dad was struggling about 30 yards from shore. Not drowning, not yet, but definitely in over his head. Haze, call it out. Distress swimmer sector 2, active but tiring fast. Action. Buoy rescue, talk him in. Go. David grabbed the buoy and hit the water like he'd been born to it. Smooth, efficient, no wasted motion. I watched from the tower, but part of me was already in the water with him. Muscle memory taking over. The approach, the assessment, the calm voice cutting through panic. Sir, I'm David. I'm here to help. Grab the buoy and let me tell you in. 3 minutes later, Vacation Dad was on the beach, embarrassed but breathing. David jogged back to the tower, adrenaline making his hands shake slightly. How'd I do?
Textbook. But next time, watch his breathing pattern before you approach. Panic makes people grab anything, including the person trying to save them. Would you have done anything different? I considered lying. The truth was, I would have been in the water 5 seconds faster, would have read the current better, would have positioned myself to avoid the man's flailing arms before he even started flailing. But those instincts came from places David didn't need to know about. You did fine, I said instead. Michael James Thompson appeared at my tower around noon, carrying 2 bottles of water and wearing the kind of smile that made my chest do uncomfortable things. Lunch break? He asked, and I noticed the way David's eyes flicked between us, cataloging information like the smart kid he was. In 10 minutes, I said, accepting the water bottle but not the invitation in his eyes. Michael had been trying to ask me out for 3 months. Casual suggestions disguised as work conversations. Hey, Rebecca, there's this new place in Santa Monica. We could grab dinner. Maybe talk about something other than rescue protocols for once. I kept deflecting, not because I didn't want to, God, I wanted to, but because wanting things had never worked out well for me. Michael was steady, patient, the kind of person who'd grown up in foster care like me, but somehow emerged without sharp edges. He saw through my deflections and waited anyway, which made him either incredibly stupid or incredibly kind. Any weekend plans? He asked, now leaning against the tower with studied casualness. Training. There's a new CPR protocol I want to review. Of course there is. His smile didn't falter. You know, Sullivan, normal people do things on weekends. Movies, dinners, conversations that don't involve hypothetical drowning scenarios for once. Hypothetical drowning scenarios keep people alive. So do human connections. Before I could respond, a child screamed cut through the afternoon air. My head snapped toward the sound, body already tensing for action. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, was pointing at the water and crying while her mother frantically looked around. Rebecca, David called from his position near the shore. Kid went under in the shallow area. I was already moving, whistle between my teeth, scanning the water for any sign of disturbance. There, a small hand breaking the surface for maybe half a second before disappearing again. The water was shallow enough that I didn't need to swim, just sprint through knee-deep surf until I reached the spot where the hand had appeared. The kid was right there, maybe 3 feet down, eyes wide with terror and confusion. I grabbed him under the arms and lifted him clear of the water. He coughed, sputtered, and immediately started crying, which meant his airway was clear and he was going to be fine. His mother reached us a second later, tears streaming down her face. I just turned around for a second, she gasped, just to get his towel. It happens, I said, handing over her son and trying to keep my voice gentle. Water can be deceiving, even shallow water. But my hands were shaking as I walked back to the tower, and Michael noticed. He always noticed. Rebecca, he called softly. You okay? Fine, I said, but the word came out too sharp, too fast. The truth was, even simple rescues like this one sent my nervous system into overdrive. The sound of water closing over someone's head, the feeling of dead weight in my arms, the split second of wondering if I'd reach them in time. It all connected to something deeper, something I couldn't quite let myself remember. That was beautiful work, Michael said, falling into step beside me. Kid never had a chance to panic because you were there so fast. Just doing my job. Most people don't do their job like that. I wanted to tell him that most people hadn't learned to swim while drowning, that most people didn't wake up gasping from nightmares about water filling their lungs, that most people's job wasn't a daily confrontation with the thing that had nearly killed them. Instead, I just nodded and climbed back onto my tower,
binoculars raised, scanning the water for the next threat that was always, always coming. What would you have done if you were me? Accepted the compliment and moved on? Told Michael the truth about why every rescue felt like life or death? Let me know in the comments. The afternoon light was wrong. I couldn't explain why, couldn't put my finger on the exact moment it shifted, but something about the angle of the sun hitting the water made my skin crawl. It was 2:43 p.m., the beach was at peak capacity, and I should have been focused on the chaos of summer crowds. Instead, I found myself staring at the water like it was speaking a language I'd forgotten how to understand. The first flashback hit while I was restocking the first aid kit. My hands were steady, muscle memory guiding me through the familiar routine of checking supplies, when suddenly I wasn't on the tower anymore. I was 7 years old, small hands gripping the edge of a bathtub, water lapping at my chin. The memory lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it left me breathless and disoriented. "Rebecca," David's voice cut through the fog. "You okay up there?"
Fine, I called back, but my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Thin, uncertain. I forced myself to focus on the immediate. Count the swimmers, check the current patterns, scan for potential problems. But my usual laser focus felt fractured, like trying to see clearly through a broken mirror. A child's distant cry, just excitement, nothing dangerous, made me flinch so hard I nearly dropped my binoculars. The sound triggered something deeper, more primitive than memory. My heart rate spiked, palms went sweaty, and for a moment I couldn't tell if I was on the Lifeguard tower or somewhere else entirely. Somewhere darker, somewhere that smelled like lavender soap and fear. Sullivan. Michael's voice, closer now. I looked down to find him standing at the base of my tower, concern written across his features. "You've been up there for 4 hours straight. When's the last time you took a break?" "I don't need a break." That wasn't what I asked. He climbed the ladder without waiting for permission, settling onto the platform beside me with the easy confidence of someone who'd been doing this job for years. This close, I could smell his sunscreen and the salt air that clung to his skin. "Talk to me," he said, and his voice carried the kind of gentle authority that made people confess things they'd sworn to keep secret. "Nothing to talk about." "Your hands are shaking." I looked down, startled to realize he was right. I tucked them under my thighs, but the damage was done. Michael saw everything. "Is this about earlier, the kid in the shallow end?" "No." "Yes. Maybe. I didn't know anymore. Every rescue triggered something these days, like my past was leaking through cracks I'd thought were sealed. "Rebecca, I've been watching you for 3 years. You're the most composed person I know under pressure, but today you look like you're barely holding it together." Before I could respond, David's whistle shrieked from his position down the beach. A woman had gone under in the deeper water, struggling against a current that was stronger than it looked. Without thinking, I was on my feet, tracking her position, calculating distance and response time. But something was wrong with my perception. The woman in the water, from this distance with the sun glare and my rattled nerves, she looked familiar. Dark hair floating around her face, pale skin, the way she moved her arms. For a terrifying moment, I thought I was looking at Catherine, my mother. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The woman who had tried to drown me 21 years ago. "Rebecca, go!" Michael shouted, but I was frozen, caught between present reality and a past that refused to stay buried. David was already in the water, moving toward the struggling swimmer with the kind of focused determination I trained into him. I should have been backing him up, should have been coordinating the rescue, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The woman David was pulling from the water wasn't Catherine. Of course it wasn't. Catherine was hundreds of miles away, probably still cycling through rehab centers and halfway houses like she had been for the past decade. But the resemblance was enough to send my carefully constructed world tilting off its axis. "Rebecca." Michael's voice, closer now. I looked down to find him standing at the base of my tower. What just happened? "Nothing, I'm fine." "Bullshit." The word was sharp enough to cut through my spiral. "You went somewhere else just now, somewhere bad."
I watched David help the woman to shore, watched her cough up seawater and accept a towel from a concerned bystander. Normal rescue, normal response. Nothing catastrophic. So why did I feel like I was dying? I need to call my therapist. The words escaped before I could stop them. Michael's eyebrows rose, but he didn't ask questions. Go, I'll cover your sector. Dr. Jennifer Lynn Parker's office line went straight to voicemail. Her emergency line would be for actual emergencies, and I couldn't quite classify whatever was happening to me as life-threatening. Yet. I left a message anyway, hating the way my voice cracked. Dr. Parker, it's Rebecca. I think I'm having some kind of episode. At work. Can you call me back? The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of forced normalcy. I performed my duties with mechanical precision, but my mind kept drifting to places I'd spent years learning to avoid. The feel of water closing over my head. The sound of my own voice, 7 years old and terrified, pleading for my life. The moment I realized that the person who was supposed to protect me was the one trying to kill me. At 4:17 p.m., I spotted her.
Not a woman who looked like Catherine. Not a trick of light or a trauma-induced hallucination. Catherine Marie Sullivan, my mother, was walking across the beach toward the exclusive resort area, moving with the kind of careful deliberation that suggested she was either drunk or heavily medicated. Maybe both. She looked older, grayer, thinner than I remembered, but the sharp angles of her face were unmistakable, and so was the way she held herself, like she was carrying invisible weight that threatened to drag her under. I grabbed my binoculars, hands trembling as I focused the lenses. It was her. After 21 years of careful separation, of restraining orders and address changes and deliberate silence, she was here, at my beach, in my sanctuary. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. "No," I whispered, but the word was lost in the sound of surf and summer crowds. She was real. She was here, and she was walking toward the water. What would you have done if you were me? Run? Pretend I hadn't seen her? Called security and had her removed? Tell me in the comments, because I still don't know if I made the right choice. When your worst nightmare puts on a flowered sundress and walks onto your beach, you have exactly 3 options: run, fight, or freeze like a deer in headlights while your entire world implodes. I chose freeze. Catherine Marie Sullivan, my mother, my destroyer, the woman who had tried to murder me in a bathtub when I was 7 years old, was standing 50 yards away, reading a resort menu like she was deciding between the salmon and the pasta special. Not like she was the reason I'd spent my childhood in foster care and my adulthood in therapy. The panic attack hit me like a rogue wave. One moment I was functioning, the next, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except grip the railing of my Lifeguard tower and fight not to fall 15 feet to the sand below. My chest felt crushed, my vision tunneled. Every breath was a battle I was losing. I stumbled down the ladder somehow, muscle memory carrying me when conscious thought failed. The first aid station was empty, everyone else was on patrol, and I locked myself inside, back pressed against the door like Catherine might burst through it any second. The flashback came whether I wanted it or not. 7 years old, bath time. The water was too hot, but I didn't complain because complaining made her worse. She'd been strange all week, talking to people who weren't there, forgetting to feed me, staring at me like I was something dangerous. "It's not safe out there, baby," she said, her voice soft and sing-song and completely wrong. "The world is going to hurt you. I can't let that happen." Her hands on my shoulders, pushing me down, water closing over my head. The horrible moment of understanding that this wasn't an accident, wasn't a mistake. My own mother was trying to kill me. Fighting with everything I had. Tiny fists, desperate lungs, survival instincts that shouldn't exist in a child. Learning to swim in the most literal sense, swim or die.
The neighbor calling 911 because of the screaming, police breaking down the door. Catherine crying that she was saving me, that the voices told her it was the only way. And me, soaking wet and traumatized, being wrapped in a blanket by a social worker who promised everything would be okay. The first of many lies adults would tell me. "Rebecca?" Someone was knocking on the first aid station door. Michael's voice, tight with concern. "Rebecca, open the door." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The panic had me in its grip, and all I could do was ride it out like a psychological hurricane. "I'm coming in," Michael said, and I heard the jingle of keys. Captain Foster must have given him the emergency override. He found me curled on the floor between the supply cabinet and the examination table, hyperventilating and shaking like I was hypothermic. To his credit, he didn't ask questions. He just sat down beside me and started talking in the low, steady voice he used to calm panicked swimmers. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. You know the drill. You've talked other people through this same thing." It took 10 minutes for my breathing to return to normal. Another 5 before I trusted my voice enough to speak. "There's someone on the beach," I said. "Okay. Someone you know?" "Someone I hoped I'd never see again." Michael was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Family?" I nodded because it was easier than explaining that family was the wrong word for what Catherine and I were to each other. Predator and prey, maybe. Victim and perpetrator, but not family. Not in any way that mattered. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. "I can tell Captain Foster you're sick." The offer was tempting. I could walk away, let someone else handle my sector, avoid whatever confrontation was inevitably coming, but leaving felt like giving Catherine power over me that she'd lost the day I aged out of the foster system and realized I could choose never to see her again. "No," I said, "this is my beach, my job. She doesn't get to take that away from me." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Michael helped me to my feet, his hand steady on my elbow. "What do you need from me?" "Just stay close, please." He nodded, and I saw the moment he filed this conversation away for later analysis. Michael was patient, but he wasn't stupid. He'd want answers eventually. Answers I wasn't sure I was capable of giving.
We walked back to my tower together, and I forced myself to scan the water with something approaching professional competence. Catherine was still on the beach, but she'd moved closer to the shoreline. She was talking to herself, or to someone only she could see. Even from a distance, I could tell she was under the influence of something. Her movements were too loose, too unpredictable. "The woman by the yellow umbrella," I said quietly. "Dark hair, floral dress, that's her." Michael followed my gaze, his expression carefully neutral. "She looks unsteady. She has bipolar disorder and addiction issues. When she's in an episode, she's not safe to be around." It was the most I'd ever told anyone about my family situation. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. Is she dangerous? To herself? Always. To other people? I paused, remembering the weight of her hands on my shoulders, the water closing over my head. It depends on what the voices are telling her. Catherine was walking toward the water now, her gait unsteady but purposeful. She ignored the strong current warning signs, ignored the fact that she was fully dressed, ignored David's attempt to get her attention as she passed his position. "Ma'am," I heard David call out, "the conditions are pretty rough today. Maybe stick to the shallow areas." She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that he'd spoken. And then she was in the water, sundress floating around her like a jellyfish, walking deeper with the single-minded determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Oh, God," I whispered, because I knew that look. I'd seen it before, 21 years ago, right before she tried to drag me into death with her. The irony was so sharp it cut. My mother, who had tried to drown me as a child,
was about to drown herself at the beach where I'd built my entire career around preventing exactly this kind of tragedy. "Rebecca," Michael said urgently, "she's in trouble." The current was stronger than it looked from shore, and Catherine was fighting it badly. Her head went under once, twice. She surfaced gasping, arms flailing in the kind of uncoordinated panic that meant she had maybe 60 seconds before exhaustion and physics dragged her down for good. David was already moving toward the water, rescue buoy in hand. But I stepped into his path. "No," I said, "I've got this one." Because if my mother was going to die, it wasn't going to be because I stood by and watched. And if she was going to live, it was going to be because I chose to save her, despite everything she'd done to me. It was going to be my choice this time, not hers. The water was cold against my skin as I ran into the surf, but not as cold as the realization that after 21 years of running from my past, it had finally caught up with me in the one place I thought I was safe. Time slowed to a crawl as I watched Catherine stumble deeper into the surf. Every lifeguard instinct I'd honed over 3 years screamed at me to move, to act, to save the person who was clearly drowning. But this wasn't just any person. This was the woman who held my 7-year-old head underwater and whispered that death was a mercy. The Pacific Ocean didn't care about our history. The current that caught Catherine was the same one that claimed tourists and locals alike, indifferent, powerful, and absolutely lethal if you didn't respect it. She went under again, this time staying down longer. When she surfaced, her movements were weaker, more desperate. "Rebecca!" David shouted from shore, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I stood frozen at the water's edge, rescue buoy in my hands, caught between 21 years of training myself to stay away from this woman and 3 years of training to save everyone, no matter who they were. Catherine's head disappeared beneath the surface again. This time she didn't come back up. "Move!" Michael's voice cut through my paralysis, and suddenly I was running into the surf, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had failed. The water was rougher than it looked from shore. Each wave fought me, tried to push me back, but I'd been swimming in these conditions since I was 18. I knew how to read the current, how to use it instead of fighting it. But knowing and doing are different things when the person you're swimming toward once tried to murder you. I reached the spot where Catherine had gone under and dove, eyes burning from the salt water as I searched the murky depths. The Pacific is nothing like a swimming pool. Visibility is maybe 3 feet on a good day. I swept my arms in wide arcs, feeling for any contact, any sign of her. My lungs were starting to burn when my hand brushed against fabric. I grabbed hold and pulled, bringing Catherine's limp body to the surface. She was unconscious, dead weight in my arms, and for a moment the present collapsed into the past. 7 years old, fighting for my life in a bathtub, her hands on my shoulders pushing me down, the water filling my nose, my mouth, my lungs, the certainty that I was going to die. But I wasn't 7 anymore. I was 28, trained in advanced water rescue, and no matter what history existed between us, I wasn't going to let anyone drown on my watch. The swim back to shore was the longest of my life. Catherine's unconscious body made every stroke a battle, and the current that had pulled her out was now fighting to keep us both. Waves broke over our heads, salt water burning my throat as I fought to keep her face above the surface. "Come on," I gasped, more to myself than to her. "Come on, stay with me." My feet finally found sand, and I half-carried, half-dragged Catherine toward the beach. David and Michael were there immediately, helping me pull her from the surf and onto the dry sand. She wasn't breathing.
CPR on a stranger is clinical, methodical, almost routine after years of training. CPR on the woman who tried to kill you is something else entirely. Every compression a confrontation with trauma, every rescue breath a choice to give life to someone who once tried to take yours. "Call 911, I shouted to David as I tilted Catherine's head back, checking her airway. Water poured from her mouth, mixed with vomit. I rolled her to her side, letting gravity help clear the obstruction, then positioned her flat again. 30 compressions, hard, fast, right between the nipples like they taught us. Count out loud to keep rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Her ribs were fragile under my hands, more fragile than they should have been at 53.
I could feel them flexing with each compression, could hear the wet rattle in her lungs that meant water was still blocking her airways. 2 rescue breaths. Tilt the head, lift the chin, seal your mouth over hers, and breathe life back into someone who had tried to steal yours. "Come on, Catherine," I whispered between breaths. "Don't you dare die on me now." Because that would be just like her, wouldn't it? To show up in my life uninvited, trigger the worst panic attack I'd had in years, and then die before I could get any answers about why she was here, what she wanted, whether she even remembered what she'd done to me. Another round of compressions. My shoulders were starting to burn, but I kept going. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, check for response. Nothing. A crowd was gathering, beachgoers drawn by the drama, pointing and whispering. Someone was recording with their phone, which made my skin crawl, but I couldn't worry about that now. "Anything?" Michael asked, kneeling beside me with the emergency oxygen kit. "Not yet," I said, starting another round of compressions. On the 23rd compression, Catherine's body convulsed. Water erupted from her mouth, followed by retching coughs that sounded like life fighting its way back into her lungs. Her eyes fluttered open, the same dark brown eyes I saw in the mirror every morning, the same eyes that looked down at me with confusion and madness 21 years ago. "Rebecca," she whispered, her voice raw from salt water and near death. "Rebecca, is that you?" She knew me. After all these years, after everything that had happened, she knew exactly who I was, which meant her presence here wasn't coincidence. "Don't try to talk," I said, slipping into professional mode because it was safer than acknowledging the personal. "You nearly drowned. Just focus on breathing." But she kept staring at me with those familiar eyes, and I saw recognition there, and something that might have been relief or regret or both. The sirens were getting closer. The paramedics arrived in a flurry of professional efficiency, equipment, questions, vital signs, preparations for transport. I stepped back and let them work, my hands still shaking from adrenaline and something deeper, more complicated than post-rescue nerves. "Excellent work," the lead paramedic said to me as they loaded Catherine onto a gurney. "How long was she down?" "Maybe 90 seconds total underwater," I replied. "She was conscious and responsive within 5 minutes of starting CPR. That's why she's alive. You saved her life." The words should have felt good. That's what we train for, what we live for as lifeguards. The knowledge that our skills, our vigilance, our willingness to risk ourselves for strangers makes the difference between life and death. But this didn't feel like triumph. It felt like being trapped in someone else's nightmare. Catherine was fighting the oxygen mask, trying to speak. Her eyes kept finding mine even as the paramedics worked on her. "Rebecca," she managed to say around the mask. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." 21 years too late, but there it was. The apology I'd stopped waiting for sometime around my 16th birthday. "Ma'am, you need to stay calm," one of the paramedics said to me. "We're going to take good care of you." But Catherine wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I knew you worked here. I needed to see you." "Why?" The word escaped before I could stop it. She opened her mouth to answer, but Captain Foster appeared at my elbow before she could speak. "Sullivan, I need you to step back," he said quietly. "Let the medical professionals handle this." I nodded and moved away, but I could still hear Catherine calling my name as they loaded her into the ambulance. "Incredible work out there," a voice said behind me. I turned to find Eleanor Victoria Blackwood, one of the resort's regular guests, approaching with the kind of determined stride that usually meant complaints about beach maintenance or noise levels. "Thank you," I said, preparing for whatever criticism was coming. But Eleanor surprised me. "I've been coming to this beach for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that rescue. The way you handled yourself under pressure, it was extraordinary." Before I could respond, she was calling to other guests, pointing at me. "This is the lifeguard who just saved that woman's life. Rebecca Sullivan. Remember that name." More sirens in the distance. These ones different, police rather than medical. I watched a squad car pull into the parking lot and felt my stomach drop. Rebecca? Detective Maria Elizabeth Rivera introduced herself as she approached, badge visible but not aggressive. I'm investigating the incident. Can we talk? What kind of investigation? Just routine when someone nearly drowns. We like to make sure it was accidental. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. I understand you knew the victim. The word victim hit wrong. Catherine was many things, but victim wasn't the first one that came to mind.
She's my mother, I said, and watched Detective Rivera's eyebrows rise slightly. I see. And when was the last time you spoke with her? About 10 years ago. We're not close. That was putting it mildly, but how do you explain to a stranger that your mother tried to murder you, that you'd spent your entire adult life building a wall between yourself and the woman you just risked your life to save? Did she seem disoriented when she entered the water? Yes, she ignored warning signs, ignored safety protocols, and appeared to be under the influence of something. Detective Rivera nodded, making notes. We'll need a full statement, but that can wait until tomorrow. You've been through enough today. As she walked away, Michael appeared at my side. How are you holding up? I don't know, I said, honestly. I think I need to call my therapist. I think that's a good idea. I pulled out my phone and dialed Dr. Jennifer Parker's number, praying she'd pick up this time. It went to voicemail again. Dr. Parker, it's Rebecca. I need to see you as soon as possible. Something happened today, something I'm not sure I can process on my own. The beach was starting to return to normal around us, families resuming their picnics, children building sandcastles, the eternal rhythm of summer vacation continuing as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Catherine was alive because of me, and now I had to figure out what that meant for my carefully constructed life, for my hard-won peace, for the future I'd built on the foundation of never seeing her again. What would you have done? Would you have saved her? Could you have looked your abuser in the eye and chosen to give them life? Tell me in the comments, because I still don't know if I did the right thing. The call from Detective Rivera came at 6:47 a.m., exactly 16 hours after I'd pulled Catherine from the Pacific Ocean. I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, when my phone rang. Miss Sullivan, I need you to come to the station today. We've uncovered some information about your mother's behavior before she entered the water. What kind of information? The kind that suggests this wasn't an accident. My coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering against the kitchen floor in a spray of ceramic and caffeine. Because somewhere deep down, I'd known. The way Catherine had walked into the water, ignoring every warning sign, every safety protocol, the purposeful determination in her movements, the fact that she'd traveled hundreds of miles to end up at my beach specifically. An hour later, I sat across from Detective Rivera in a sterile interview room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. She had a laptop open, security footage frozen on the screen. This is from the Sunset Beach Resort lobby, she said, clicking play. Yesterday, 1:43 p.m. I watched Catherine stumble through the lobby, clearly intoxicated or heavily medicated. She was talking to herself, gesturing animatedly at empty air. Hotel staff gave her a wide berth, but no one intervened. She's been staying at the resort for 3 days, Detective Rivera continued. Staff reported erratic behavior. She asked multiple employees about the lifeguard schedule, specifically about you. The room felt like it was shrinking around me. She came here looking for me? It appears so. This is from the beach access camera. Another video, this one showing Catherine reading a lifeguard duty roster posted near the entrance. She'd stood there for nearly 10 minutes, studying the schedule like she was memorizing it. There's more, Detective Rivera said gently. We found a note in her hotel room. She slid a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside was a piece of hotel stationery covered in Catherine's familiar handwriting, though shakier than I remembered. Rebecca, I know you won't forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. But I needed to see one more time before I go. The voices are getting louder again. They're telling me things, terrible things. I can't fight them anymore.
I'm tired of fighting. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you deserved. Maybe the water will wash away what I did to you. Maybe it will wash away what I am." My hands were shaking as I set the bag down. She planned this. She came here to kill herself in front of me. That's what it looks like. The question is, did she change her mind at the last minute, or was she hoping you'd save her? I thought about Catherine's eyes when she'd regained consciousness on the beach. The recognition, the relief, the way she'd whispered my name like a prayer. Had she been surprised to wake up alive, or had she been counting on my training, my inability to let anyone drown on my watch? I don't know. I don't think she knew either. My phone buzzed. Dr. Jennifer Parker, finally returning my calls. "I need to take this," I told Detective Rivera. "Rebecca?" Dr. Parker's voice was warm but concerned. "I got your messages. Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm at the police station. My mother, she tried to kill herself yesterday, at my beach. I had to save her." There was a long pause. Dr. Parker had been my therapist for 3 years, had walked me through the process of understanding and processing my childhood trauma. She knew exactly what this meant. "How are you handling this?"
I don't know. I keep thinking about whether I did the right thing, whether saving her means I'm supposed to forgive her or try to have a relationship with her, or, Rebecca, stop. Saving someone's life doesn't obligate you to anything beyond that moment. You acted according to your training and your values. That doesn't erase what she did to you. But she's alive because of me. Doesn't that mean something? It means you're a good person who saves lives. It doesn't mean you owe her anything. After I hung up, Detective Rivera walked me through the rest of the investigation. Catherine was in the psychiatric ward at Seaside General on a 72-hour hold. She'd admitted to planning the suicide attempt, but claimed she'd changed her mind once she got into the water. "Do you believe her?" I asked. "I believe she's mentally ill and has been off her medication for months. I believe she came here with some kind of plan involving you. Whether that plan was suicide, reconciliation, or something else, I'm not sure she knows." As I drove back to the beach for my afternoon shift, my phone rang again. "Michael, Captain Foster wants to see you before you go on duty," he said. "Rebecca, there are reporters here. Someone posted video of the rescue online and it's going viral." Great, because having my most traumatic day broadcast to the internet was exactly what I needed. The psychiatric ward at Seaside General smelled like ammonia and despair. I'd spent 2 days avoiding Detective Rivera's suggestion that I visit Catherine, but curiosity and something that might have been closure finally won out. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with nearly drowning. Her dark hair was streaked with more gray than I remembered, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of decades of poor decisions and worse sleep. "Rebecca," her voice was hoarse, whether from the intubation or emotion I couldn't tell. "You came." "Don't read too much into it," I said, taking the chair farthest from her bed. "The detective thought it might help the investigation." She flinched at my tone. But I wasn't here to make her feel better. I was here for answers. "Why? Why my beach? Why now?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I've been watching you for years, following your career. I know that sounds terrible, but I needed to know you were okay. You lost the right to care about whether I was okay when you tried to murder me." "I was sick, Rebecca. I'm still sick, but I'm trying to get better." "Are you? Because showing up at my workplace and trying to kill yourself in front of me seems like progress." She started crying then, quiet tears that I felt nothing for. I'd cried enough tears over this woman to fill an ocean. "I wanted to tell you I was sorry, and I wanted to see the person you became despite me. You're incredible, Rebecca. You save people. You make the world safer. Everything I couldn't be. Don't do that. Don't try to make this about redemption or pride or anything noble. You came here to hurt me one last time." "No." Her voice was sharper now, more like the Catherine I remembered. "I came here because I was going to die anyway. The cancer is back, worse than before. 6 months, maybe less." The words hit me like a physical blow.
Cancer. She was dying. So you thought you'd give me a front row seat to your suicide? I thought if I died at your beach, you'd know that I was thinking about you at the end. That despite everything I did wrong, everything I destroyed, you were the last thing I wanted to see. That's not love, Catherine. That's selfishness. I know, she whispered. I know it is, but it's all I have left to give you. I stood up, suddenly desperate to get out of this room, away from her orbit of destruction. You want to give me something? Stay away from me. Get the help you need, fight the cancer, or don't, but leave me out of it. I built a good life despite you, not because of you. Don't try to insert yourself into that. Rebecca, wait! But I was already walking away, and this time I wasn't looking back. In the hallway, I called Dr. Parker. How do you feel? She asked after I told her about the conversation. Empty. Not angry, not sad, just empty. That's okay. You don't have to feel anything specific about her. You're allowed to be done. Am I? She's dying. That doesn't obligate you to anything. Dying doesn't erase the harm someone caused. You get to decide what relationship, if any, you want with her. For the first time in 3 days, I felt like I could breathe. Captain Foster's office felt like a tribunal when I walked in 3 days after the rescue. He was sitting behind his desk with a file folder thick enough to contain my entire career, and his expression was unreadable. Sit down, Sullivan. I sat, trying to read his mood and failing. Captain Foster had been military too long to give anything away. I've had 3 conversations in the past 24 hours, one with the department psychologist, one with the mayor's office, and one with a reporter from Channel 7 who wants to do a feature story on your rescue. Sir, I can explain.
Explain what? That you performed a textbook rescue under extreme personal duress? That you saved a life while managing your own psychological trauma? That you demonstrated exactly the kind of professionalism and skill we expect from our lifeguards? I blinked, confused. I thought you were going to suspend me. For what? Doing your job? He leaned back in his chair. Rebecca, what you did out there was extraordinary. Not just the rescue. Anyone with your training could have pulled someone from the water. But managing your own trauma while saving the person who caused it? That takes a different kind of strength. I almost didn't do it, I admitted. I froze. If David had gone in instead. But he didn't. You did. You made the choice to act despite your fear, despite your history. That's what heroism looks like. He opened the file and pulled out a form. The department psychologist wants to see you weekly for the next month. Standard protocol after a traumatic incident. You'll remain on full duty unless you request otherwise. I don't want time off. I want to work. I figured. There's something else. He pulled out a newspaper clipping. The story hit the LA Times this morning. Local lifeguard saves estranged mother who tried to drown her as child. They want to interview you. I looked at the headline and felt my stomach drop. My story is out there? Some of it. David talked to a reporter before I could stop him. He didn't know about your history, he just talked about how professional and skilled you were during the rescue. I stared at the newspaper, seeing my life reduced to a sensational headline. But maybe that wasn't entirely bad. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from what happened to me. There's a support group, I said suddenly, for trauma survivors. Dr. Parker mentioned it months ago, but I wasn't ready. And now? Now I think maybe helping other people process their trauma might help me process mine. Captain Foster smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him since this whole mess started. That sounds like something the Rebecca Sullivan I know would do, turn her worst experience into a way to help others. That afternoon, I found David sitting on the Lifeguard platform, staring out at the water with the kind of intensity that meant he was working through something difficult. You okay? I asked, climbing up beside him. I keep thinking about what you said, about being a lifeguard means being willing to save anyone, no matter who they are. That's right. Even if they hurt you before? I studied his face, recognizing something I'd seen in my own mirror for years. David, is everything okay at home? He was quiet for a long moment. My dad drinks. When he drinks, he gets angry. When he gets angry, he rolled up his sleeve, revealing bruises in various stages of healing. How long has this been going on?
Years. But lately, it's getting worse. I thought about calling the police, but he's still my dad, you know? I looked at this kid who reminded me so much of myself at his age, trying to navigate an impossible situation with grace and dignity. You know what I learned from saving my mother? That doing the right thing doesn't mean accepting abuse. I saved her life because that's who I am, not because she deserved it. But I don't have to have a relationship with her. You can get help, get safe, without owing your father anything. Will you help me? Yes, I said without hesitation. We'll figure it out together. As the sun set over the Pacific, I watched families pack up their beach gear and head home. Normal families, complicated families, broken families, trying to heal in their own way. I thought about Catherine, alone in her hospital room, facing cancer and mental illness and the consequences of her choices. I thought about David, brave enough to ask for help despite years of conditioning that told him to stay silent. I thought about Michael, patient enough to wait for me to be ready for love. And I thought about Dr. Parker, who'd spent 3 years teaching me that healing doesn't require forgiveness. And I thought about the water, endless and indifferent, washing away footprints and sandcastles and secrets, always returning to claim what belonged to it. But not today. Today, I was stronger than the current. 6 months later, I stood on the same lifeguard tower where everything had changed, watching David train a new group of recruits. He'd moved out of his father's house, gotten a restraining order, and was living with a foster family that actually understood what it meant to be safe. The bruises had faded, but more importantly, the fear in his eyes had been replaced with something stronger.
Remember, I called out to the trainees, your job isn't just to save people from drowning. It's to save them from their worst moments, whatever those look like. Michael appeared at the base of my tower, holding 2 coffee cups and wearing the smile that still made my chest do impossible things. We'd been officially dating for 3 months now, taking it slow, building something real on a foundation of mutual understanding rather than shared trauma. How's the new batch? He asked, climbing up beside me. Promising. That kid with the red hair reminds me of David when he started, eager to save the world. Speaking of saving the world, you ready for tonight? Tonight was the trauma survivor support group I'd started facilitating. 8 people who'd lived through various forms of family violence, all learning that healing didn't require forgiveness, just courage. Catherine had died 2 months ago, quietly, in a hospice facility 3 hours away. I hadn't attended the funeral, but I'd sent flowers with a card that read simply, "I hope you found peace." Because that's what forgiveness looks like sometimes. Not reconciliation, not absolution, but the simple recognition that everyone deserves peace at the end, even the people who hurt us. "I'm ready," I told Michael, watching the sun paint golden paths across the water. "I'm ready for all of it." The Pacific stretched endlessly before us, indifferent and eternal, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I'd learned to read its moods, respect its power, and, most importantly, trust my own strength to navigate whatever currents came my way. Water had tried to destroy me once. Now it was the medium through which I saved others. And that transformation from victim to survivor to healer was the real rescue story. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing training protocols for the new summer season. The subject line made my coffee go cold. "Thank you for saving my life. Dear Rebecca, you don't know me, but my name is Sarah Chen. I saw the documentary about your story last year, the one where you talked about trauma and healing and how our worst experiences can become our greatest strengths. I wanted you to know that your words saved my life. I've been struggling with PTSD from childhood sexual abuse for 15 years. Like you, I thought healing meant I had to forgive my abuser, that I wasn't really healed unless I could find it in my heart to let go of my anger. Your story taught me that healing can look different, that strength sometimes means setting boundaries, not breaking them down. I started therapy, I cut contact with family members who enabled my abuse, I stopped apologizing for protecting myself, and yesterday I started volunteering at a crisis center for teens. You'll probably never see this, but I needed you to know. The story you told about learning to swim while drowning, it taught me how to save myself. With gratitude. Sarah Chen." I read the email 3 times before the tears made it impossible to continue. This was the 15th message like this I'd received since the documentary aired.
15 people whose lives had changed because I'd been willing to share the ugliest parts of my story. The documentary had been Michael's idea, actually. Your trauma support group is helping 8 people, he said. Imagine how many more you could reach if you went public with your story. I'd resisted at first, the thought of having my childhood trauma dissected by strangers, of becoming a poster child for survival, felt like another kind of violation. But Dr. Parker had helped me understand the difference between sharing trauma for attention and sharing it for purpose. If telling your story helps one person feel less alone, isn't that worth the discomfort? The documentary Deeper Waters, a story of trauma and healing, had aired 8 months ago on a major streaming platform. It followed my journey from childhood abuse through foster care, my career as a lifeguard, the day I saved Catherine, and the work I had been doing with trauma survivors since then. The response had been overwhelming. The trauma support group I facilitated had grown from 8 people to 40, with a waiting list of over 100. I'd been invited to speak at conferences, had consulted on lifeguard training programs that incorporated psychological first aid, and had co-authored a paper on the intersection of professional duty and personal trauma. But the individual messages, like Sarah's, mattered most. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Saw the news about the grant. Congratulations. The grant. The Rebecca Sullivan Foundation for Trauma-Informed Water Safety had just received a $1 million grant from the state to develop training programs for lifeguards and first responders who might be dealing with their own trauma while serving others. The foundation's motto, printed on business cards and websites and the backs of volunteer t-shirts, was simple. Healing doesn't require forgiveness. It requires courage.
I walked out to the beach where David was running advanced rescue drills with a group of new lifeguards. At 23, he'd become one of our most skilled instructors, with a particular gift for working with recruits who'd experienced trauma. He'd finished college last year on a scholarship from our foundation, studying psychology with a focus on adolescent trauma recovery. How'd they do? I asked, as the trainees headed back to the station. Really well. That kid Jessica reminds me of us. Hyper-vigilant, skilled, probably running from something. Keep an eye on her. Sometimes the best lifeguards are the ones who learned early that water can kill you. David nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. That was the thing about shared experience. It created a shorthand for pain that words couldn't capture. Eleanor Victoria Blackwood approached us, moving slower than she had 3 years ago, but with the same determined stride. At 78, she'd become an unlikely ally, donating generously to the foundation and serving on our board of directors. Rebecca, dear, she said, I have someone I'd like you to meet. She gestured to a teenage girl standing awkwardly near the snack bar, arms wrapped around herself in a posture I recognized immediately, someone trying to take up as little space as possible. This is my great-niece, Emma. She's had some difficult experiences with her stepfather. I thought perhaps she might benefit from your group. I studied Emma's face, seeing my own 17-year-old self in her downcast eyes and defensive stance. How old are you, Emma? 16, she whispered. Do you know how to swim? She shook her head. Would you like to learn? Something flickered in her eyes. Hope, maybe? Or just the desperate need to be good at something. Could I? Absolutely. David here teaches swimming lessons specifically for people who've had traumatic experiences with water or with trust. He's very patient. I watched David's face soften as he looked at Emma, recognizing something in her that he'd once seen in himself. We start with shallow water, he said gently. No pressure, no rushing. You control the pace. As Eleanor led Emma away to discuss lesson schedules, Michael appeared at my side. Even after 3.5 years together, he still had the ability to ground me with just his presence. Good day? The best. The foundation got the grant. Sarah Chen sent me an email that made me cry happy tears. And I think we just found our newest swimming student. And tonight? Tonight was the monthly meeting of the Trauma Survivors Support Group. We'd outgrown the community center and now met in the conference room of a local church. 40 people of various ages and backgrounds, united by the understanding that survival was just the beginning of the journey.
Tonight we're talking about the difference between healing and closure, about how some wounds never fully close, but they can still become sources of strength. Michael squeezed my hand. Speaking of healing, Dr. Parker called. She wants to discuss the research study again. The research study. Dr. Parker, along with colleagues from 3 universities, wanted to document the long-term outcomes for people who'd participated in trauma-informed support groups. They were particularly interested in the model we'd developed, one that emphasized empowerment over forgiveness, boundaries over reconciliation. "I'll call her tomorrow," I said. "Right now, I just want to watch the water." We stood in comfortable silence, looking out at the Pacific. It was golden hour, the time when the setting sun painted everything in warm light and made even the most ordinary moments feel magical. "Do you ever think about her?" Michael asked quietly. I knew he meant Catherine. I'd been thinking about her more lately, especially since the documentary aired. Not with sadness or anger, but with something closer to understanding. Sometimes, I think about how different things might have been if she'd gotten help earlier, if the system had worked better, if mental illness wasn't so stigmatized. But mostly I think about how her choices, even the terrible ones, led me to exactly where I'm supposed to be. Do you think she'd be proud of what you've built? It was a question I'd asked myself many times. Catherine had died believing I hated her, which wasn't entirely wrong, but wasn't entirely right either. Hate required energy I didn't have to spare. What I felt for her now was something more complex. A recognition that she was both perpetrator and victim, that mental illness had stolen her ability to be the mother I needed, and that understanding her pain didn't require excusing her actions.